Now, the first topic I'd like to discuss with you is the difference between the geocentric and heliocentric theories and the role these played in astrology falling out of favour. All right, so I'm going to start with the geocentric theory first. So the geocentric theory puts Earth at the centre of the universe, with the sun and all the other planets revolving around the Earth. And we, of course, now know that this is incorrect. But for a long period of time, this is what we believed to be true. Where heliocentric theory puts the sun at the centre of the universe with the Earth and all the other planets revolving around the sun. And we now know that this is correct. And we've known this for quite some time. The problem is that astrology is based on the geocentric theory, and the geocentric theory has been disproved. But this doesn't mean that astrology itself has been disproved. And we need to understand that it is because astrology is based on our perspective from Earth. It is as though the sun and all the planets are revolving around us. The same way that we believe Mercury turns retrograde, even though it doesn't, it's because from our perspective on Earth, it looks like it does. And that's what we care about. So I'll give a bit of background to the geocentric theory. The geocentric theory was the astronomical model of the universe in Europe for about 1,400 years, leading up to the 16th century. And it's accredited to Ptolemy in his scientific text, Almagest. I'm guessing that's how it's pronounced. And Almagest was written in about 150 AD and was considered the authoritative text on astronomy. And Ptolemy's system drew on many previous theories that viewed Earth as a stationary centre of the universe. And this explanation stood for about 1,500 years and was bolstered by its acceptance of the Catholic Church. Ptolemy, a Greek mathematician and astrologer and astronomer, played a very significant role in the development of Western astrology. And he was the most respected astronomer of his time and is the author of the book Tetrabiblios, which is also known as the Book of Stars. And in his 4-part book, Ptolemy laid the foundations of Western astrology. And under Ptolemy, the planets, houses, and signs of the zodiac were first explained in great detail. And the explanation hasn't really changed very much to this day. Now, I read this book a few months ago. I didn't find it to be a particularly easy read by any means. It wasn't very well structured, but I certainly did recognise the astrology that I practice today. So Ptolemy sourced the information for this book from all the old texts at the famed Library of Alexandria. And this library is considered the greatest in the world because it stored a lot of the ancient knowledge that was still available to us. And Ptolemy laid out all the complete theories from ancient Egypt, Sumeria, and Greek Hellenistic sources in the book. So he didn't come up with the ideas, he just wrote about what already existed. Ptolemy wasn't responsible for creating the astrological techniques in his book Tetrabiblios. He instead was responsible for organising the information already available to demonstrate that astrology is based on logical principles. And Ptolemy's book Tetrabiblios was used as a textbook in European universities during the Renaissance and into the 17th century. So it really was the astrology Bible. Now, Ptolemy's book was written from a geocentric perspective, which of course became disproved. And this was a major contributing factor to astrology losing credibility and falling out of favour. So let's now talk about the heliocentric theory. And the heliocentric theory is the astronomical model developed by the Polish monk Nicholas Copernicus, which isn't exactly a name that rolls off the tongue by any means. The heliocentric theory put the sun motionless at the centre of the universe with the Earth and other planets moving around the sun in circular paths. And this model displaced the geocentric model, which had been around and believed for centuries. And this discovery of the heliocentric theory is often regarded as the launchpad to modern astronomy and the scientific revolution. It was a pretty big deal, to say the least. So the impact of this discovery meant that the understanding of where and how the celestial bodies moved and related to each other changed, which was pretty major, as you can imagine. So the positions of the sun and the Earth never changed, and neither did the placements of the planets from the perspective of Earth. And that is what we care about. But the acceptance that the sun was the centre of the universe still had a significant impact on astrology. And this is because astrology is based on the geocentric perspective, which has now been disproved. Copernicus shared his heliocentric theory with colleagues sometime before 1514, but he didn't publish it until 1543, which was shortly before his death. From what I understand, it's because he was too scared to publish the theory any earlier because it was such a major game changer. So Copernicus, in his heliocentric theory, more accurately described the length of the solar year while maintaining a mathematically ordered universe. And he introduced some innovations in his heliocentric theory. And one of those innovations was that the center of the universe is near the sun and that the sun is stationary. And another innovation was that the Earth and other planets revolved around the sun and in a particular order. And the retrograde motion of the planets is also explained by the Earth's motion. These innovations don't actually change the way that we practice astrology, but this seems to have been missed at the time, and it's had a flow-on effect to this day. And that's because the Copernicus heliocentric theory disproved the Ptolemy geocentric theory, and the discovery that the sun was the center of the universe and not the Earth was used to discredit astrology. And Ptolemy's maths and astrological meanings were still accurate, and the ephemeris also remained 100% accurate when used with the Copernicus heliocentric theory and the Kepler's planetary laws. There was also no difference when using Ptolemy's theory to create and interpret charts, but none of it seemed to matter anymore, because by the mid-17th century, astrology was struggling to maintain its respected position, and astrology was gradually removed from university curriculum, and a division also developed between astronomy and astrology, which still exists to this day, which we would all be aware of. And the intellectual standing of astrology and its credibility collapsed around the end of the 17th century. But the birth chart is a map of the heavens at the moment of birth from the perspective of Earth. It is as though you've come out of your mother's womb with a camera and you've pointed it straight up at the heavens and you've taken a photo. You've captured a moment in time from your perspective, and this forms your birth chart. This matches the geocentric perspective. And this perspective means that Ptolemy's astrological interpretations remain accurate. And because of this, Ptolemy's work continues to provide the foundation for the astrology we practice today. So there's a quote from a book called The History of Magic and Experimental Science that I wanted to share with you. And the quote is from Lynn Thorndike, who was an American historian of medieval science and alchemy. And I think the quote clearly expresses the credibility of astrology as presented by Ptolemy. And it doesn't really matter that the geocentric perspective was disproved on an astronomical level. So the quote is, as you can see, "So only the opponents of astrology appear to have remained ignorant of the Tetrabiblios, continuing to make criticisms of the art which do not apply to Ptolemy's presentation of it." So I think people just wanted to criticize astrology for the hell of it. And unfortunately, that generated some power and momentum that we're living with to this day. So the reason I wanted to share my research on the geocentric and heliocentric theories is that we need to understand the difference between the geocentric and heliocentric theories to reinforce that it's not astrology that's been discredited, but the geocentric theory from an astronomical perspective. What we care about is our perspective of the universe from our place on Earth. This just happens to be a geocentric perspective, but we're not saying that this is how the universe works. We're saying that this is our perspective.